Hey y'all, thanks for coming to see me and welcome to Gatekeeping and the DevOps Revolution. It's my first time speaking here, and so I'm very excited to talk to you all. But after I'm done, I hope you keep thinking about what I'm about to say. I want you to remember what it was like to be new to tech. Think about how you feel every time you pick up something new and how every new thing feels just a little bit different. You need to examine that and like really, really, really look at it because it can be hard to remember. It's easy to forget these things. And I want you to use the result to make things better for the people who come after us. So my name is Kat Cosgrove, and I'm a developer advocate. That is my cat, Espresso, who you might hear at some point. She likes to climb up into my lap while I'm talking. But before I was a developer advocate, I was an embedded Linux engineer. When I started, I was fresh out of a coding boot camp, and I was suddenly thrust into a very unfamiliar and fast-paced environment where I needed to quickly become functional in quite a lot of different tools and technologies and workflows that I had just never been exposed to before. I wasn't a complete newbie. I had freelanced as a web developer for a couple of years before that, but this was nothing like building WordPress or Joomla sites for small businesses. Anyway, before I go any further, if you would like to get a hold of me later, that is easy to do. You can find me on Twitter at Dixie3Flatline. If you miss me or come up with a question later on, don't hesitate to reach out. So here's what we were doing when I was on that team as an embedded engineer. We were building a proof of concept, trying to demonstrate fast, over-the-air updates for cars rather than the manual updates in a service center that most cars use now. You may be thinking, my Tesla. I know, your Tesla. However, most cars can't do that. More of them can do it now than could when we built this, but it's still pretty novel. It was very cool. It solved a very real technical problem, but I was also way out of my depth at first. In just a couple of months, I had to learn about the difficulties of embedded Linux development and some electrical engineering, but I also had to learn all of these technologies that you see on this slide. I would never have been able to do that if I didn't have a manager who believed in me and a tech lead who functioned as a truly outstanding mentor. So, Brennan, if you're watching this for some reason, you were really rad and I miss you. None of this was easy to learn. Not because I don't have a degree in computer science or because I'm not smart enough or because these things are just always difficult to learn no matter who you are. It's the way we talk about and teach these things. I'll go into more detail on that later. First, let's make sure that everyone's on the same page. This is CDCon, so I know I can probably assume that you all know what DevOps means, but to err on the side of safety, this is the definition of DevOps I'll be running with during this talk. DevOps is the term for the union of the development team and the IT operations team through the use of a specific set of practices and tool chains with the ultimate goal of shortening the software development lifecycle and delivering more high-quality software. So, in order for DevOps to work, we need both tools and a cultural shift. This is an established fact, but it's still the topic of a lot of conference talks about DevOps while more companies move away from older methodologies and more into what we do. I'm not going to go into that a ton because much more qualified people than me give outstanding talks on this very subject, probably right here at this conference, and you should go listen to them. But to give context within the scope of this specific talk, for developers, DevOps may mean changing the way you write software. Your code has to be written in a way that's more modular so that it's easy for other people to maintain. You should be merging with your source repository and pulling from main often, sometimes multiple times a day, and making much smaller changes every time. Build and unit tests need to run with every single commit, and that process needs to be automated. If the entire team does this, then conflicts happen less often, and failures are discovered much earlier, which allows you to fix them immediately. So developers no longer exist in a silo. Everyone has to do DevOps to some extent. The cultural shift takes some getting used to, but you're going to be much more efficient and much less stressed out because a lot of the things you were doing manually before are automated by your tools. The point I'm trying to make here is that an understanding of DevOps practices and tooling is not the exclusive domain of people with the word DevOps in their job title. It's everyone who touches either side of this equation, or else it doesn't work. It's not just DevOps engineers or SREs or release managers. It's not just whoever is taking care of your infrastructure. A lot of this stuff is actually pretty new in the grand scheme of things. Some of it is very old, but the first commercially successful serverless platform was AWS Lambda in 2014. And now there's more of them than you can shake a stick at, plus some serverless databases just for good measure. Just 4 years ago, Linkerd and the concept of a service mesh didn't exist. But in 2021, it's hard for some people to imagine a world without one. Some pieces of DevOps have been around since the early 90s, but they've changed so radically that they're nearly unrecognizable at this point. Our industry and our technology, it rapidly evolves. We've got layers and layers of abstraction between us and our code, and more teams across an organization are expected to have some level of familiarity with these things. So you, the expert, maybe with years of experience in the field and a title with the word DevOps in it, you remember the birth of these tools, and you may even remember the birth of the concepts that led to these tools. You have the context and the adjacent domain-specific knowledge to make picking up a new tool like one of these easier because you understand the why behind it. You've done without them, and you've personally experienced the very specific ways in which things were harder then. So a high-level definition of something like a service mesh is enough for you. It's immediately clear how this tool could make your life easier. New grads and junior developers, they don't have that context, and there are a lot of them, and we really need them. Here's some numbers to convince you. I like numbers. In the US, about 65,000 people graduate from a degree program in computer science each year and rising. When you add coding bootcamp grads, you get around another 23,000, and that number is rising much more rapidly than a traditional degree program year over year. That's almost 90,000 juniors each year. It's a lot of new talent and a lot of new ideas, and we want that, right? According to data from CompTIA last year in the US, there were 307,000 new tech jobs. 123,000 of them were in Washington State, which is where I live. Now, that does include a variety of roles and seniority levels, but it's still an absolutely wild number. Now, I don't know what these new grads are good at or what they like, but we mostly agree that DevOps is a full spectrum, all or nothing thing if it's going to work out to its greatest potential. Your junior devs are going to touch some of this stuff at some point, and it's better for all of us if they actually understand it. But we aren't really making that easy. Whether we realize it or not, the way we're doing things now is gatekeeping. It's unintentional and it's not malicious, but it is gatekeeping. Let's talk about that. Gatekeeping is the act of preventing access to something like a career, community, or a fandom unless specific and usually unreasonable requirements are first met. For example, consider a woman, me perhaps, going to the card store to play Magic the Gathering on a Friday night. If you don't know what Magic the Gathering is, that's okay. It's a competitive trading card game that's been popular since the 90s. Instead of just letting me hang out and play, someone might ask me to name the winning deck from every Magic the Gathering World Championship since 1994. That's an absurd requirement, so it's gatekeeping. It's malicious and intentional, though. This is usually a gendered thing. I submit that there is a second type of gatekeeping. So intentional gatekeeping is when we make an actual decision to take a real action with the express intent of forcing somebody to prove themselves in one way or another before being able to participate without applying that standard consistently. You're going out of your way to keep a particular set of people out or raise the bar for entry. Passive gatekeeping accomplishes the same thing. We keep somebody out of a community or make it much harder to get in by requiring them to meet some bizarre standard. But instead of making an active choice, this happens unintentionally, whether it's out of laziness or bad culture or habit or ignorance. In my opinion, there are 4 ways in which we're passively preventing junior engineers from finding their place in DevOps: jargon, documentation, mentoring, and hiring. I'm going to start with my personal pet peeve: the rampant use of jargon and our persistent assumption that everyone reading our content has been around since the dawn of DevOps with a deep understanding of all of its history and lore and arcane tooling. To illustrate this point, I present to you 2 pieces of jargon from things the majority of you are probably not experts with. So, fencing is an Olympic sport with 3 different styles. All of them have different rules: foil, epee, and saber. This is an actual sport. It's not a martial art, and it's been around for a long time now. You've probably seen it at the Olympics. Regardless of which weapon you fence, the definition of attack is always the same, and people who don't fence are almost never able to define it correctly. Take a moment and guess. You might think that an attack is any action intended to score a touch or a point against your opponent. That's not correct. This is the official definition from the FIE rulebook. The attack is the initial offensive action made by extending the arm and continuously threatening the opponent's target, preceding the launch of the lunge or flesh. On the surface, it makes sense, kind of, even if you don't know anything about fencing. The words go together. You understand that it's the first offensive action a fencer takes, so maybe they're like sticking their arm out, and they're aggressively threatening their opponent, and they're not going backwards or doing any hedging or making any defensive motions before finally... What? You can guess at what a lunge is, right? A lunge is a lunge. But what does flesh mean? We have jargon in the definition of our jargon. In this case, it's not actually a huge problem. Fencers know what a flesh is, and this sport is really, really old. All of the domain-specific terminology is established, and it has been for a long time. This is one Google search. Fencing gets away with this because in a lot of cases, the language used to talk about the sport hasn't changed in a century. DevOps technologies change year over year. We have technologies to provide abstractions for technologies that are abstractions for more technologies that didn't exist 10 years ago. We can't do that and expect newbies to understand quickly, just like I can't expect you to understand the next example. Goats. Does anyone know what that means in the context of video games? This is virtual, so I can't make eye contact with the crowd, but I'm going to pretend that a couple of you do know what I'm referring to and have indicated that with a smirk and a nod, just for my own entertainment. I want to talk to the people who don't. Overwatch is a first-person shooter by Blizzard with a robust competitive professional scene. In Overwatch, the term GOATs refers to a specific composition of heroes playable in the game, originally consisting of 3 tanks, heroes with a lot of health who may move slowly and don't necessarily do a ton of damage, and 3 healers with no dedicated damage characters. The origin of this specific piece of jargon is kind of weird, though. You might guess that it stands for greatest of all time, because that's a fairly common turn of phrase. It's used to describe an athlete who's particularly talented. However, it actually refers to the name of a team by the same name who first popularized that composition and made a run through the bracket of Overwatch contenders Blizzard's semi-professional league. It was unstoppable at the time, and so the composition was named after the team. Now, this is not user-friendly. This has layers. It's a jargon onion. Unlike the example from fencing, GOATS gives you zero indication of what it could possibly mean. So when Blizzard wanted to expand viewership of Overwatch League to a more casual audience through streaming partnerships with ESPN and Disney, they had to do away with the term GOATS. Shoutcasters for the matches were instructed to call the composition 3-3 instead, because it means what it says, 3 tanks and 3 healers, rather than viewers needing a whole bunch of lore about semi-professional Overwatch competitions from now like 3 years ago to know what it means when somebody says, hey, let's go GOATS. Now, mainstream esports is in its infancy. It feels like we get a new piece of slang or jargon once a month, but it's easy for me to pick it up because I've been around esports for a long time and I have all of the context. That's not so for new folks trying to get into watching it casually. The term was a barrier for entry that didn't need to be there, so they got rid of it. The same goes for DevOps. Like Blizzard in the Overwatch League, if we want people to use our tools or move towards a more DevOps way of doing things at their companies, we have to make it involve fewer hurdles. Just using more descriptive words or going out of our way a little to clearly define the domain-specific words we do use goes a long way towards making things more approachable. An experienced engineer moving over from a completely unrelated field to yours or trying your tool for the first time should still be considered a newbie. If we all put in just a tiny bit more work to define the jargon when we use it and do away with things that don't make sense on the surface, we can make our products and our ways of doing things far more easily adoptable, which makes all of our jobs easier, especially if you've got to justify your salary to somebody else. This is especially true when it comes to your technical documentation. Have a quick start guide. That quick start guide should be written as if it's directed at someone with zero understanding of your tool. That means you need to give your reader the why for each thing. Don't just tell me that your product facilitates service-to-service communications between microservices, usually using a sidecar proxy. Tell me why that's useful in practical terms. What problem specifically are you solving? I know this seems really obvious, but a lot of people are still making this mistake. Linkerd is particularly good at this. Actually, their docs include links out to explanations of relevant concepts and terms. There's a step-by-step guide, and every single command you run is explained in painstaking detail. Side note, pay your technical writers more. They are a powerful resource, and they deserve to be compensated for it. They're the ones writing this. My only complaint here is the use of the word easy in a technical context, and here's why. Easy can be a very alienating term. If you use that word in your technical documentation, you need to be damn sure that it's really actually easy, not just easy for you. And it almost certainly isn't. If this new talent we want to be using our stuff doesn't find it easy when your docs repeatedly say it is, they're going to be discouraged. And I don't need to be struggling with imposter syndrome more than I already do. The reality is that none of this is actually easy until you're an expert, at which point we tend to forget that it isn't easy. Call something easy when it's not for an absolute beginner, and you're gatekeeping again. But Kat, it was hard for me. It's normal for these things to be difficult to learn. That's just the way it is. Why? So what if it was hard when you did it? It was hard when I did it. Why does it have to stay that way? Why is struggling to learn all of this, keeping 40 tabs open so you can Google every third word in a tutorial that was supposed to be for beginners, only to get 7 steps into it and find out that you also need to have a functional understanding of 3 different AWS services to follow the rest of the now not so quick start guide considered normal and acceptable? That sucks. It's not fun. It's a waste of time. It's a waste of resources, and we can fix it. Until DevOps trade schools and boot camps become a thing, or until universities start teaching these technologies too, which will take longer, I think, we have to take teaching this stuff into our own hands. Those 90,000 new grads a year, they need our help so that we can take advantage of their energy and their insight. Some people already have. There are some great books out there, workshops, and a ton of content creators writing on sites like dev.to for products they don't even own. I do this a lot just because I remember how frustrating it was to learn myself. We can't solve the problem without help, though, and we need a lot of it. And it has to come from you, from your companies, from your org, from your team, from you specifically. So if you have the energy for it, mentor someone in your spare time. Make yourself available to answer questions and make it clear that none of those questions are stupid. It's ubiquitous to us, but not everyone knows what the hell Ansible is. Proactively teach them the way they want to be taught, not the way you learned. Make it a junior on another team at your company, a new grad from the local college, or somebody from a boot camp, some random person you found on Twitter, whatever. Seniors and team leads, I'm especially talking to you here. If you let your junior teammates struggle longer than necessary, not only are you being kind of a crappy teammate, you're actively detrimental to your organization. You are wasting time, and DevOps is about reducing time wasted. As a senior, one of your responsibilities is to mentor junior teammates. Allowing things to continue as they are is just simply not doing your job. Suffering isn't a rite of passage to DevOps excellence. And on hiring managers, this is on y'all as well. You are not going to get a junior DevOps engineer with 5 years of experience with Kubernetes, Istio, Artifactory, Golang, Helm, Jenkins, Prometheus, Core DNS, Hyper-V, Perl, Network Administration, and Azure, all of it, no specific service listed. First of all, that's a senior engineer. Second, it's probably more than one senior engineer. Third, mastery in all of these things is a ridiculous requirement. You might think I'm exaggerating here, and I am, but barely. I combed through a bunch of job postings when I was originally writing this talk, and some of the requirements were absolutely wild for a junior title. This is a screenshot of an actual job listing with a title of junior DevOps engineer. Junior. This was in the first page of results on Indeed for the Seattle area. I did not have to look hard to find an example for this slide, which is upsetting, right? Reading all of these, I wonder if anyone actually knows what it means to be a junior. I wouldn't qualify for this. Lots of people you look up to wouldn't qualify for this. The difference is that we know it's absurd, but remember, we have context. Imagine how this looks to an actual junior. They don't know this is unreasonable. And this is just the skills section. The requirements section of the job rec is equally ridiculous. This is awful, and it's discouraging, and you're pushing away good people with a drive to learn who could be an asset to your organization because your expectations are unrealistic, or you had somebody who doesn't know anything about this actual job write this requirement. Inexperienced people are going to look at this and think, wow, I'm not even qualified for a junior position in this industry. Why bother? You can advise people to just apply for everything all you want, but we all know that a piece of software is filtering out a lot of these resumes before they even hit a real person's desk. This is gatekeeping too, whether it was an intentional attempt to underpay someone with more experience or it was just a mistake made in ignorance. Consider instead that the landscape for DevOps and for cloud native is so outrageously large at this point that unless your job requirements are very narrow, anyone you hire is going to have to learn some new tooling on the job. I know you can't really see what's going on in this slide, and that helps illustrate my point. This is the cloud native computing foundations landscape as of 2020. Instead of trying to hire juniors who already know everything there is to do the job on day one, because that's not a junior, juniors have to learn everything, focus first on hiring seniors and tech leads who have the core skills and technologies you want, as well as the ability to be mentors. Get them onboarded really well, and then hire juniors based on how well they learn, not what they already know out of the box. Because, reminder, nobody gets a degree in DevOps. We're all learning as we go here, including you, especially you, the experts. We're more likely to try new things first. Each of the things I've talked about here, the rampant use of jargon, documentation written like the user's already an expert, a lack of mentorship, and unrealistic hiring expectations, is preventing us from getting access to the 90,000 exceptional new talents available to us each year, and from making the best of the people we already have. Individually, these things are barriers. Together, they're catastrophic. This is a cultural problem within DevOps that absolutely needs to be addressed if we want to live up to our goals of delivering better software faster. We can't claim to be a culture of collaboration, caring, and cooperation if we're excluding anyone or forcing them to jump through a bunch of hoops to participate. DevOps exists so that we don't have to suffer through the same problems with writing and delivering software that we did before. Every new tool, technique, and strategy exists to solve a pain point. So why are we allowing these problems within our culture to continue? We're solving the problems with software and ignoring the problems with people. As long as gatekeeping like this exists, we can't angrily reply DevOps is a culture, not just a tool set, when someone thinks that CI/CD means DevOps without being hypocrites. And I know we all love saying that. So here's what I'm asking each of you to do today. Try to remember what it was like for you when you were new yourself. This might be difficult, and that's okay. Humans are really good at forgetting these things. But think about what you struggled with, the feelings you had, how long it took you to feel like an expert in anything at all, the people around you, and how they treated you at the time. Then take that and use it to change the way you speak, the way you write, the way you work, and the way you hire for the better. Thank you for coming to my session. I would also like to thank the organizers for having me and all of the sponsors that helped this event happen. You're all so sweet. I will be around to answer questions for a bit, but again, you can always get a hold of me on Twitter at Dixie3Flatline. Bye.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming. If you have any questions, I have a few minutes, I think. Forget how many minutes I have, like maybe like 7 or so. Thank you. I'm glad you thought it was a great presentation. I enjoy giving this talk. I really enjoy giving this talk. Every opportunity I get to give this talk, I do it. Compliments, cat with heart eyes emoji. Maybe my cat will come here. She might be asleep in another part of the apartment. How to be a senior, open to be mentored by juniors. I think juniors mentoring is a really cool thing that we should see more often. Juniors do have they have a unique perspective that we just cannot have because we have more experience. So a lot of that is making your junior engineers feel comfortable to correct you or feel comfortable understanding that you don't know everything. At least when I was still a junior, I tended to just assume that anybody who had more experience than me knew more than me about everything and could not be wrong. And that's not true. I'm wrong all the time, and I have years of experience. So it's a cultural thing that you have to address internally, making your juniors feel comfortable correcting people or feel comfortable acknowledging that, they know stuff too. So part of that might be letting them see you fail, letting them see you make a mistake. Yes, they also definitely may be more familiar with new tech and new tools. We do kind of get stuck in our ways. That's totally a thing we do. We get stuck in our ways and we use a tool longer than its actual relevance because it's what we're comfortable with, it's what we're used to, and it takes less effort to spin it up or plug it in or integrate it or whatever. But somebody who's like brand new may have experience with something that's actually way better suited to whatever you're trying to do. Oh, there's stuff over in Q&A too, rad. Oh, yes, you did ask the same question. Cool, answered. With documentation writing, other than nixing easy, a lot of it is like making sure that you give like practical examples. For me and for a lot of the juniors I work with through boot camps, a Hello World application needs to actually do something. Like I know that it takes more effort to put together a sample application or pipeline or whatever that actually does something, but it's much harder to adapt like a quick start guide's starter code to your actual project when all it does is like it has one endpoint that prints hello world, or it's a pipeline that has only one step and it says, hi, this is your pipeline. Like it needs to actually do something so that they can start the quick start, like run the demo, and then kind of pick it up and move it into their side project or whatever and make it actually useful to them in their own code base and then extend it. That's helpful. The hello world thing, that's only really helpful for people who already kind of know what they're doing, who already kind of know how to extend whatever your tool is or make it do more than just say hi to you. That is a big one for me, is like actual practical examples in your documentation. Yeah, the tutorials thing is helpful, but it shouldn't be the only thing you do. You do still need like a text-only, like dry reference guide to be there, but the tutorials are something that I find super duper helpful. As for videos, that super depends. Some people really, really love videos. I can't, I don't use them. I don't find them helpful at all as a learning tool, but that's me personally. So I think that often comes down to like a generational thing, whether or not you prefer like YouTube learning content versus like text-based, hands-on, written type thing. Let's see, is there anything in the Q&A? Trying to bounce back and forth here. Okay, so my session is ending in 1 minute. Thank you everyone for coming and thank you for the questions. If you have more that I couldn't get to, you can DM me on Twitter at Dixie3Flatline. I usually respond within a day or two. I get a lot of Twitter DMs and Twitter's not great at organizing DMs, but thank you again. Thanks to the organizers. Bye.